You're crouched by a fire. Smoke rises around you, curling into the cold night air. You breathe it in without thinking twice. This feels modern. It isn't. Humans have been doing exactly this for longer than writing has existed, longer than cities, longer than the wheel. So, when did it actually start? For decades, the answer anthropologists gave was a few thousand years, mostly tied to a handful of scattered pipe fragments. Then, in 2021, that answer collapsed almost overnight. Archaeologist Daron Duke was excavating a site called Wishbone in the marshy flats of Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert. Inside the remains of an ancient fire pit, his team found 4 tiny charred seeds. They belonged to a wild plant in the Nicotiana family. In plain terms, wild tobacco. Radiocarbon dating of the burned wood around them put the hearth at roughly 12,300 years old. That number stunned the field. The previous record for tobacco use had come from pipes found in Alabama with nicotine residue baked into the clay, dated to around 3,300 years ago. Duke's discovery pushed the timeline back by nearly 9,000 years in a single find. Why does this matter so much? Because the location made no sense for an accident. Tobacco didn't grow naturally at that exact spot. The seeds don't burn well, so they weren't fuel. And they were found exactly where people sat and breathed. The most likely explanation is also the simplest one. Someone, at the edge of the Ice Age, deliberately gathered a plant, brought it to the fire, and used it to alter how they felt. Here's where it gets stranger. This wasn't a one-time invention that slowly spread across the globe from a single point. Roughly 9,000 years after that Utah fire, on the opposite side of the planet, in the Pamir Mountains of western China, people were independently doing something almost identical, with a completely different plant. Archaeologist Yimin, working with researcher Robert Spengler of the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History, studied wooden bowls pulled from a 2,500-year-old burial ground called Jirzankal Cemetery. Inside, they found chemical biomarkers, meaning leftover molecular traces of burned cannabis. Not the low-potency hemp grown for fiber and seeds. This strain had unusually high levels of THC, the compound responsible for cannabis's mind-altering effects. The burial site sat along an early branch of the Silk Road, and the evidence suggests mourners burned the plant in small wooden braziers, breathing in the smoke together during funeral rites. And it isn't an isolated claim. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing around the same period, described people on the Central Asian steppes inhaling vapor from cannabis seeds thrown onto heated stones as part of a ritual cleansing after burying their dead. 2 unconnected cultures, continents apart, independently arrived at the same basic act: burn a plant, breathe the smoke, alter the mind. So let's reconstruct that first known moment. Picture the marshy edge of an Ice Age lake bed, roughly 12,000 years ago. A small band of hunter-gatherers has stopped here. Birds are part of dinner tonight, their bones later turning up in the same hearth as evidence of the meal. Someone walks back from higher ground, carrying leaves stripped from a low, sticky-leaved plant most of the group recognizes but rarely touches, since it grows nowhere near this exact spot and had to be sought out on purpose. Into the fire it goes. The smoke curls up differently than ordinary wood smoke, sharper, more bitter in the air. Heads turn. Someone leans in closer than they need to, breathing deeper than the cooking fire alone would call for. Across that small circle, something shifts, just slightly, in how everyone feels. Nobody writes this down, obviously. Nobody could have known that thousands of years later, someone would dig through the dirt where they once sat and find the proof. Here's the counterintuitive twist almost nobody expects. Nicotine and THC were never made for humans at all. Plants evolved these chemicals as a defense system, bitter, irritating compounds meant to poison or repel insects and grazing animals that tried to eat them. Humans took a literal toxin, engineered by evolution to make us stop eating a plant, and figured out how to extract exactly the effect the plant was trying to prevent. Our ancestors weren't discovering a treat. They were hacking a warning system and turning it into something else entirely. That single discovery rippled forward for thousands of years. Tobacco was eventually domesticated in South America around 8,000 years ago. Bred deliberately, rather than just gathered wild, the same slow process that turned wild grasses into wheat and corn. Across indigenous cultures throughout the Americas, it became sacred, woven into ceremony, diplomacy, and medicine, never something to do absent-mindedly. The Maya used it in ritual contexts, sometimes mixed with other plants, sometimes offered to deities as part of sealing an agreement between strangers. Cannabis followed a similar arc across Asia, carried along trade routes alongside silk and horses, embedded in funerals meant to send the dead toward the next world, and later showing up in medical texts and steam baths, thousands of miles from where it first grew. Which raises an uncomfortable mirror for today. None of those original uses looked like a habit squeezed into a 5-minute break outside an office building. They were collective. They were occasional. They carried weight. Somewhere between an Ice Age hearth and a convenience store counter, the ritual got stripped out and the chemical got industrialized, mass-produced, and marketed back to us as something to crave constantly, rather than something to set apart from ordinary life. You probably know someone who smokes today, maybe even yourself. And you probably also know it's framed almost entirely around addiction and health warnings now, packaged in branded boxes, sold at the same counter as gum and lottery tickets. That's not wrong, and nobody is arguing the health risks aren't real. But it's only half the story. The urge underneath it, the pull toward altering how a moment feels, toward sharing that altered moment with the people standing around you, is not new. It's not weak-willed, and it isn't a defect unique to the present. It's closer to 30,000 years of human behavior, distilled and stripped of its ceremony. Then distilled again into something a corporation found a way to manufacture by the billion and sell back to you in a small paper tube. So the next time smoke curls past you, from a cigarette, a campfire, a stick of incense at a temple, you're not doing something modern at all. You're crouched by a fire, breathing in something humans have been breathing in since before they had a word for fire itself.